Good morning. Welcome. I've just noticed it's 10 o'clock on the iPhone, and Apple seems to get most things right, so we'll have to presume that the time is right for that. So, welcome to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Panel, which is being webcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Please can I remind members to switch their microphone on when speaking and to turn it off when they have finished speaking. Apologies. I'm well aware we have Meronisa has apologised and Keith Culverwell has apologised and Jonathan Morgan is substituting for Deborah Taylor. To help me, members, I think we all recognise we've got quite a wide spread of where people's seating position. If I look straight at the PCC, I cannot see Michael, I cannot see Jonathan, and I can't even see you either. So please, if you want to ask a question, you really will have to make a bit of a fuss, I think. Michael will obviously aid me, as will Ewan, but maybe the spread's too far out. The ladies at the back, are you all from the OPCC? So it is an away day of learning, is it? Or, but welcome, whatever. Ivan's sitting right at the back. I've just noticed where he's sitting. So I've never seen such quite a spread out chamber before. But we do move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of November, which is page 3 to 6. I will go through correctness on page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Nothing at all, so thank you very much, members. Item 2, public question time. I haven't been advised of any questions at all. Item 3, I haven't been advised of, and I haven't taken any decisions to take any urgent items anywhere on the agenda at this time. 4, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. So I start off looking around at Michael. It's like a scan on your phone now. No one raises their hands. So moving on very quickly to very much the meat of today's meeting. I was saying to the lady, sorry, I've forgotten your name, from the City Council who's here for, maybe you'd like to just very quickly, by the way, just introduce yourself. I was a little bit rude there.
Here goes. I'm Anita James. I'm a Senior Democratic Support Officer working for Leicester City Council. I'm here today to observe, just to get a flavour of the meeting, because the administration is due to move over to the City Council in the near future.
So are you suggesting you'll be the new Ewan?
I'll be the new Ewan.
The new Ewan. Well, thank you very much and welcome to County Hall today. I was saying to the lady earlier on that when it comes to the budget, it really is the most important meeting of the whole year. And I'm really keen for every member to be here on this particular day. I do accept meetings with change dates, and that's why Debbie Taylor can't be with us, why Meronisa can't be with us, and also Keith. I do accept that. But taking that to one side, it is so important, the budget, and the PCC is accountable to the public, but also the panel's accountable to the public as well. And so thank you for a good attendance today. But moving on to the proposed preset and medium-term financial plan, which is pages 7 to 50 in your report. I turn to Lord Bark, the PCC, to present the last budget in your term.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be presenting my proposed budget for the year 2021 to you, Chair, and to your committee and to the panel. It is the most important meeting, I think, that we have each year, and that's why I make no apology at all for having asked some of fairly new members of staff of the OPCC to come and listen, as members of the public as well, to today's hearing. That would actually be in the Grand Council chamber itself, I suppose, is is a compliment as well, but I think it has more to do with the fact that we had to put it back for a week, and I'm grateful to you and the County Council for putting us in here and agreeing to put back the date for a week. That was necessary because the settlement, the government settlement around call grant and precept was obviously held back by the December election, and it would have been really impractical, given the date when the settlement was announced, for there to have been a proper meeting of the Police and Crime Panel on the day intended. Actually, I would argue it turns out that that delay was worth it. The settlement, and here I choose my words quite carefully, was pretty generous, I have to say that. For the first time in over a decade, and as a consequence of the decisions around core grant, that's the government grant to the Police and Crime Commissioner, and the precept, I am proposing that in addition to the 107 new officers that we agreed last year at the budget that I would finance out of precept and reserves, and in addition to what I call the 89 new national police officers that the government are funding, that's the first of the, we don't know the exact sum that we're going to have, but the first of the 20,000 new officers that there will be nationally in England and Wales. In addition to those two figures, I'm proposing an additional 100 police officers for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and more than that, 20 police PCSOs, so that by the end of March next year, 2021, we will have 2,104 police officers in LLR. Chair, the background is pretty well known, but just worth repeating, I think. In 2010, LLR had 2,317 police officers. We lost over 500 of them, so that by 2017, we're down to 1802. In an area where, as the panel knows well, there's a growing population, and as elsewhere in the country, and the emergence of new and more complex crimes. I promised to increase that number if I could, and started slowly with that increase. But now, more quickly, we will be just 200 short of the figure in 2010. I think these figures put today's proposals in perspective. They are ambitious, but they still don't bring us back to where we were 10 years ago. The panel, over the last 3 years, has been very supportive about issues such as police numbers and other issues too. And although I don't know for sure, I suspect pressure has been put on members of Parliament and government ministers too, in order to increase the scope for more police officers in LLR. I think that pressure has paid off, and so I want to thank you for that. I think I should just say before I pass on to Paul Dawkins, who will go through the paper with your permission, that I have at all stages consulted with the Chief Constable about the proposals that we bring before you today. That's all I want to say at this stage, and I'll pass on, if I may, to the Finance Officer, Paul Dawkins.
Thank you, Lord Buck. Paul.
Thank you, Lord Watt. Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the paper quite carefully. There is a lot of detail, so we'll go through page by page with your agreement, Chair. So to start off on page 7, paragraph 1, the purpose of the paper is to present the 2020-21 precept proposal. and the additional considerations contained within the paper, and also to present the medium-term financial plan. I'll come back to the recommendations at the end of my input, Chair, if I may. But moving on to page 8 and the summary, I'll just briefly go through the headlines in relation to the budget proposals for next year and then take you through some more detail as we move on through the paper. So starting at paragraph 4, it has been a very long process this year in terms of the budget round. A lot of conversation nationally, regionally and locally. And as members are aware, the general election back in December did postpone the announcement of the settlement. Normally we will receive the provisional data in relation to the settlement during the second, third week of December. We received the final details in relation to the settlement on the 22nd of January, so quite late in the day with no opportunity to consult around that. But what the settlement did confirm, and it took some clarifying over 24, 48 hours, was that there is indeed just over a £7.9 million increase in core revenue grant funding next year. And the purpose of that funding, which has been made clear by Home Office, is to meet the infrastructure and any related salary costs in support of delivering the additional 20,000 police officers nationally over the period 2020 to 2023. I'll come back to that later in the report. But that covers things like IT, vehicle fleet, a whole host of issues, training costs, etc., as well as the people that provide those services. Moving on to paragraph 6, the Commissioner has been briefed on the current and emerging operational challenges, as Lord Bock said in his opening address, and the Chief Constable has been consulted throughout. And we have very much built the budget around the objectives in the Police and Crime Plan and the Strategic Policing Requirement. So there are indeed strong links between that and also the new model that members have been briefed on in terms of service delivery across the force, which will be going live on the 11th of March this year. Paragraph 7, as again you heard from Lord Bock, we are planning to invest in an additional 100 police officers next year. That's over and above the 107 recruited in 2019-20, moving into 2021, and also in addition to the first year uplift of the 20,000 national increase in officer numbers. At paragraph 8, we are going to invest in 20 further PCSOs, and I'll talk more about police officers and PCSOs again as we move on through the paper. But at paragraph 9, we have looked at what reserves the Commissioner is holding, and we've taken a prudent and responsible approach to using reserves over the medium term. At paragraph 10, in considering the level of precept, we have gone through a public consultation exercise, and the details are there for members to see. But after careful consideration at paragraph 11 of the risks and the challenges that the force is facing and that additional investment opportunity that we have, the Commissioner is proposing a £10 annual increase in Band D precept for financial year 2021. So moving on, Chair, at the bottom of page 8, in terms of Leicestershire context, we are including within the paper some key aspects around some of the issues that are driving the budgetary requirement for next year, and those that are having a significant impact on policing in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. And as we move on through to page 9, what we've tried to do for you is to summarise what's happened to grant funding from 2011-12, and just to demonstrate really at chart 1 that a decade ago grant funding was £125.1 million, has reduced through time, as you can see by the height of the blue bars, and only for next year 2021 do we see an increase in grant linked to that national police officer recruitment programme. So there's been a sustained reduction in grant through time, and that of course amongst other things has meant that pay and non-pay inflation costs have not been met through core grant funding. What that's also meant for us at paragraph 15 is that there has been a shift in the amount of overall funding that's raised locally through precept or through council tax versus that's paid to the Commissioner from the Home Office in terms of grant. And we have therefore seen precept increase from 54.2 million in 11-12 to a proposed precept increase of 84.3 million for next financial year. So that's a 30 million or 56% increase in precept over the period. Moving to the bottom of page 9, paragraph 16, there is a typographical error towards the end of the paragraph there. The percentages quoted, 56 and 44%, should be 58 and 42%. I apologise for that. But over the page on page 10, you can see that at chart 2, despite the overall increase in core funding from Home Office and the proposed increase in relation to council tax, curiously, the split between central funding and council tax funding for both 2019-20 and 2021 remains the same for both years at 58 and 42%. That's in the context, though, on page 11 at chart 3 of a significant increase in population, around about a 10% increase actually over the last 10 years, and that data, of course, will be refreshed in 2021, so we expect to see a further increase potentially there at a time when police officer numbers, as we know, through austerity have been reducing, and also PCSO numbers in neighbourhoods also. So at chart 18, chart 3, paragraph 18, as we move into considering the effect of population and the link to police officer numbers, we can see that in 2010 the force did have 2,117 full-time equivalent police officers, 2,317 full-time equivalent police officers, and the comparable figure for 2020 as we close this current financial year is 1,915. So an overall reduction of 402 officers. Over the page on page 12, chart 4, on my printed version, the values haven't come through for 2021. I just wanted to check with members, it has been printed on your chart, but what it should say is to the right of 1829, as the line increases, the next value is 1915, and the top value is 2104. So that effectively demonstrates where we're hoping to take police officer establishment by March 2021 to 2,104 full-time equivalent officers. Paragraph 19, we're just attempting there to give members a flavour of the demands that the force has to deal with on an annual basis. And these are captured in the force management statement, which is in the public domain for those that wish to look into that further. But it gives you a sense of the volumes there that we're projecting for next year around calls, etc. And in terms of chart 5, we're just demonstrating there on page 11 that there is for the first time, potentially for next year, an increase in spend per 1,000 population, rising to £179, which is £3 more than it was in 2011, but of course that ignores the effect, again, of pay and price inflation that I mentioned earlier. So moving into the settlement then, at the bottom of page 13, paragraph 21, I've talked about the election, the effect that that's had. And you can see in terms of the table there at paragraph 22, that £7.9 million increase in core grant funding, which excludes the potential of a £2.5 million additional grant next year to fund the salary costs of the year 1 officer uplift, which I'll talk about later on. But also within that table is the details around the precept and the collection fund surplus, which we can see is potentially an increase of 4.8 million next year. So a £12.7 million overall increase in revenue funding for next year, or 6.8%. Over the page on page 14, paragraph 23, what that means, that £10 increase, is that it is, in terms of Band D council tax, a 4.5% increase next year, rising from £223.23 to £233.23, and that is based on a Band D tax base of 329,412 dwellings. the collection fund surplus has been confirmed at £0.5 million. But there are further pressures in relation to staff pay, inflationary increases and other contractual increases that have been captured and taken into account in terms of the budget build. But when we take that Home Office increase in funding into account, and we recognise that the funding that's been provided is to fund 3 future years' infrastructure costs, so effectively the money is being awarded to the Commissioner in advance of when it's all likely to be spent. That, together with the £10 precept increase, does mean that we will potentially generate a surplus of £1.8 million next financial year, which it's proposed is placed in the budget equalisation reserve to meet those year 2 and 3 infrastructure costs throughout the period 2020 to 2023. Moving on to tax base and collection fund at paragraphs 26 to 29, we have received all the information from the unitary councils, the boroughs and districts in relation to tax base and their collection fund services for next year. And overall at paragraph 28, there is just over a 2% increase in the number of bandy dwellings, and as already said, collection fund close to £500,000 at £492,000. As part of the settlement, paragraphs 30 to 31, we were notified by Home Office of the council tax referendum limit, which is £10, and the Commissioner is proposing within the report today that we increase by the maximum of £10, so that will not breach the referendum threshold, but it will allow a precept to be raised to the maximum. And we have, as part of the process as well, looked at some of the key strategic risks that both the Force and the OPCC face next year, and in some cases over the medium term. So police staff job evaluation has been in train for some time. The consultation in relation to that is still ongoing, but at this stage what we've agreed to do with the Commissioner is to ring fence £750,000 of the budget equalisation reserve to potentially meet the part year costs of job evaluation next financial year, should that go ahead. But we have not made any further provision for future years' costs within the budget proposals before you today. Pay inflation was confirmed last year from 1st of September at a 2.5% increase for both police officers and staff. When we look at our assumptions around pay inflation for next financial year onwards, we've again taken a national view on this and determined that 2.5% again from 1st of September 2020 is the expectation in relation to pay inflation. Emergency Services Network, that's the replacement of the airwave system that all blue light emergency services use, been significantly delayed nationally. There has been a slippage in the programme. The best information we've got from the national team coming to the meeting today is that there will be some costs next year, around about £100,000, rising to £300,000 from 21-22 onwards. Those costs are in addition to the costs that are currently provided for within the base budget. So effectively that's a growth in expenditure. And National Police Air Service currently under review, that's the helicopter in our case, and we expect potentially some changes there and possibly some cost savings coming through next year, but we need that work to complete in the first instance before we're aware of that and what the implications of that might be. Still on page 15, in terms of the budget preparation approach and scrutiny, what that does, I won't go through this, Chair, paragraph by paragraph, but what that does is effectively identify to members what the methodology is in terms of the budget build and the process that we've gone through. And it's a process that's served us well since 2008-9 when this was introduced. But we do take into account, amongst other things, the force of strategic operational risks, national intelligence model, etc. And we do also look at the force of strategic policing assessment in identifying those risks and building the budget accordingly around resourcing against those. Moving on to the bottom of page 15, Chair, paragraph 40. I have worked very closely with the Force Finance team through every step of the budget round process, and there have been numerous internal conversations, and we have been through a very rigorous challenge and scrutiny process in terms of the budget build this year. And amendments have been made where they've needed to be made. On page 16, to confirm that the Commissioner and his senior team have been in regular discussions with the Chief Constable, with Chief Officers, not just as part of the budget round process, but throughout the year in terms of identifying emerging risks and cost pressures. So very mindful of that as this paper has been put together, and that at paragraph 43 culminated in a meeting of the Strategic Assurance Board, which the Commissioner chairs, on the 17th of January, where the budget proposals contained within this paper were formally put to the Commissioner, and agreement was reached with the Chief Constable. Moving into some of the detail around the revenue budget for 2021, this now starts to introduce how the budget's built and the breakdown in relation to that. And you can see at paragraph 45 that the budget requirement, net revenue requirement for next year is approximately 199.863 million. That does represent just over a £12.7 million increase on 1920. The breakdown is there in the table, Chair. I won't run through that other than to highlight that police officer pay and allowances at nearly 105 million is the lion's share of the budget next year. If I can take now members to page 17, paragraph 47, and just work through that, because this really is at the heart of the budget for next year and links very much to Lord Bock's opening statement around investment in police officer growth. What we can see there as we move through paragraph 47 is that we have taken into account all of the allowances that are paid to police officers, any pay increments, full-year effect of the pay award, and also costs of those officers that are seconded out of force to regional and national teams and projects. And as we move down the paper there, I can confirm that the decision that Lord Bock took last year when the budget was set to raise preset by £24, but in relation to delivering further growth of 107 police officers has been a success this year. 80 will have been recruited by the end of this financial year, 31st of March, and the remaining 27 we expect to be recruited by May of this year. And we do expect all of those officers to be deployed locally across neighbourhood policing areas. We then move into the uplift, and our members will be aware of the national programme around the 20,000 officer uplift that's planned for the next 3 years. Leicestershire's share in year one is 89 officers, where nationally the recruitment target is 6,000. And we expect that 24 of those will be recruited by March 2020. So we started early. We were invited to look at that this financial year and to start to put some measures in place to begin that recruitment process, which we've done. So the balance of 65 will be recruited early on during 2020-21. So just taking the officer uplift into account, that will increase police establishment to 2,004 full-time equivalent officers by March 2021. But also linked to the 89 increase in officer numbers is a separate grant outside of the settlement that I've already talked about of up to 2.5 million. But in order for that grant to be awarded to the Commissioner, we have to demonstrate as a force that those 89 officers have been recruited. Once we're able to evidence that appropriately to Home Office, then that grant will be released. However, what that means at this stage is we're not sure what years 2 and 3 of uplift will look like. We're expecting notification from the Home Office in due course. So that's both in relation to the number of police officers, their estimated costs, and any grant funding that will go with that. Yeah, and we do expect sort of our share of the remaining 14,000 to be announced, but it's too early to say what that might be at this stage. So we can see that if we were to invest no further in police officer growth, 2004 FTEs by March 21 would still leave us over 300 officers below where we were a decade ago. So central to Lord Bork's proposal today is that there's a further uplift in officer numbers during 2021, linked to the increase in precept, and it's proposed that a further 100 additional police officers will be recruited next year. That would have the effect by March 2021 of increasing police establishment to 2,104 full-time equivalent police officers at an additional part-year cost of 1.4 million. Again, with the intention to deploy those officers locally in neighbourhoods. Over the page on page 18, we've looked at the infrastructure costs associated with recruiting those officers. So as I mentioned earlier, that's training, it's IT, it's uniform, it's all of those costs that you expect to be incurred when we increase police officer numbers. And we've estimated those at 1.5 million next year. And there are costs of 1.4 million in the year after, and the same figure in the year after that will be, we assume, incurred by the force during that time frame once the uplift in officer numbers is confirmed by the Home Office in due course, as I mentioned earlier. Moving on to police community support officers. A decade ago we had 251 full-time equivalent PCSOs. Currently we are estimating 181 PCSOs by March 2020. So a reduction of 70 there, and again as part of the Commissioner's budget proposals for next year, an increase of 20 PCSOs is planned, which will take us back up to 201 full-time equivalent PCSOs by spring 2021. Still short of where we were 10 years ago, but an increase that's welcome nonetheless. And the part-year cost of that recruitment is £0.4 million. Support staff, we're estimating just over 1,100 full-time equivalent support staff in force next year. That excludes PCSOs, and they are mainly frontline staff actually in the call centre, scenes of crime, those sorts of areas of business. The back office costs and the functions that support the force and the OPCC have been significantly leaned out over the last 10 years. No plans at this stage to increase investment in those areas, although the increase in police officer numbers might mean in future that we need to look at that. When we look at the regional picture, we are in a number of regional collaborations with other forces, and members are aware, and we work very closely with the regional team to identify those costs, which for next year are estimated at £9.6 million. And then finally, in relation to non-pay, so that's all those other costs that are incurred above and beyond the salary costs of police officers, PCSOs and staff. We've looked at those very carefully, all of the contracts associated with those, etc. And we built those costs into the base for next year. There is a significant investment in IT, very much links with the national drive again from Home Office in relation to digitalising the police service. And Lord Bork, during his entire term of office, actually has invested very heavily in the IT space and in digital, which is certainly now delivering significant productivity efficiency gains for the force and transformed our ways of working. So moving on to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, we can see there that in 2019-20 the costs of the office were approximately £1.26 million. Those costs are increasing marginally by £20,000 next year, and what we have managed to do is to absorb much of the pressure in relation to pay and price inflation in the OPCC through a restructure of the office and try to keep those costs to a minimum. at a time at paragraph 51 on page 19 where the OPCC has taken on a range of additional activities, and they're listed there for you. Moving on to commissioning, the commissioning framework has been agreed for next year with partner agencies and internally within the OPCC, and a slight increase in projected spend there of £4.369 million, which at paragraph 54 includes a £250,000 provision for small grants to community organisations. But we do plan next year to use nearly £300,000 worth of the commissioning reserve to fund the commissioning proposals, and we have had confirmation at paragraph 56 of a Ministry of Justice continuation grant for victims and witnesses, which has increased by 1.84% to 1.278 million for next financial year. Moving on to the capital strategy and the capital programme, we have at Appendix 2 some detail in relation to that. I'll come back to that as we get towards the conclusion of the paper. But it is a statutory requirement that we produce the capital strategy and the Treasury management strategy. Very technical by nature, and don't intend to go through all of the detail, but I will give you a pen picture as we move towards the end of the paper. So on to the medium-term financial plan on page 20, paragraph 62 onwards. We try to plan for the medium term, which in our case is a 5-year period, but the challenge always is that funding that's awarded to the Commissioner is still only on an annual basis. So there is an element of crystal ball gazing around what our future funding arrangements might be, and that includes what the council tax referendum threshold might also be. But a key point to highlight as we move into paragraph 65 is that of the total funding available to the Commissioner, approximately 98% of that is made available to the Chief to fund day-to-day policing, which has gone up from previous years, which were set at 97%. But as we move into paragraph 66, we have taken a cautious approach to setting the medium-term financial plan. The assumptions have been discussed at both a regional and a national level, and the consensus is, generally speaking, that in our force area, council tax base or number of dwellings that we bill will increase by 1.75% per annum. We are assuming that all existing council tax related grants will continue up to and including the end of the medium-term financial plan period. But we're also assuming that core grant funding from Home Office will not increase beyond 2021 and will be held at flat cash levels. Linking to D, paragraph 66, potentially the 2% preset referendum threshold being reintroduced after next financial year. So we've taken a prudent, some might argue pessimistic view of that. But what we've tried to do is to demonstrate that we are being responsible in terms of our medium-term financial planning and also use of reserves to support that, which we'll discuss as we move on through the paper. Payables, I've mentioned, are assumed at 2.5%. At E and at F, non-pay inflation, generally speaking, is around about the 2% mark. But we're not aware, beyond that, of any sort of changes around the funding formula review, which we hope will come through next year. If it does, then we should benefit from that, both as a force and OPCC, but also as a region. And we are assuming that there's no further borrowing required to fund the capital programme at this stage. So when we take into account those key assumptions, the table at paragraph 67 on page 21, before use of reserves, does identify that for next financial year, with a £10 increase in precept, we do generate a surplus of £1.8 million, as I mentioned earlier. But through time, the deficits do start to appear, predicated on flat cash and a 2% increase in precept from 2021-22 onwards. So in an attempt to budget prudently for the medium term, we are proposing to use a substantial amount of reserves next year. And at paragraph 69, a decision that the Commissioner has taken is to reduce the general fund or the emergency fund by £1 million from £6 million to £5 million to effectively part fund the medium term financial plan. But it does still mean that we'll be within the acceptable range of 2 to 5%, which is a national target that we have to comply with. We are planning to use the budget equalisation reserve next year, and we do have a number of other earmarked reserves that are set aside for specific purposes. But we do recognise that we can't place I guess too much faith in being able to use reserves over the medium term indefinitely, because a reliance on reserves over the long term is neither affordable nor sustainable. But at this point in time, we do think we are recommending a prudent use of reserves over the medium term. They are reviewed on an annual basis. So moving into page 22, and specifically in relation to the general reserve, we will be carrying the reserve at 2.6% over the medium term. No further plans to use that reserve beyond next year. And the budget equalisation reserve, we do expect to peak at £12.5 million by 31st of March 2021, which again we're planning to use over the medium term to effectively provide an affordable, sustainable position for the next 3 financial years. So £9.6 million of that projected £12.5 million is planned to be used over the next 3 years. I've highlighted for you at C some of the key earmarked reserves that we carry. Won't dwell on the detail there, Chair, but at paragraph 71 on the bottom right-hand side of that table, the net movement in reserves planned for next year is £1.37 million. So that's a net contribution to the budget equalisation reserve next year. I've talked about the precept already, but I would identify at paragraph 73 that the Commissioner is extremely grateful to those that have participated in and completed the precept survey this year, and we're satisfied that in terms of the preceptor proposal, it does deliver against the Commissioner's priorities in his police and crime plan. Paragraph 75 onwards is a statement from the Chief Constable, and I'm sure the Chief will probably want to introduce some aspects of that later, Chair. And at paragraph 76 is my Chief Finance Officer's statement, where essentially I support the budget proposals in the paper, the prudent use of reserves, and do conclude that the budget has been prepared on a robust and prudent basis, and that investment in a number of areas as detailed in the report are in line with the police and crime plan priorities. And finally, as I've alluded to, Chair, we are planning for the prudent use of reserves next year and in the second and third year after that. So that really concludes the presentation of the paper, Chair. The Appendix 1, again just checking with Ewan, was cropped on my version. Members hopefully have the full version, so it should, on the left-hand side of Appendix 1, demonstrate what the budget is for 1920. As we look to the right, then there's the 5-year plan, including the detailed breakdown for the budget for 2021. And then in Appendix 2, page 31, the capital strategy just sets out in headline terms what the spend or the planned spend is in relation to estates, IT, vehicle fleet. And to summarise that, the proposed programme for next year is £10.2 million, the details of which are captured in the following pages. On page 33, Chair, the Treasury Management Strategy, which is provided in more detail at Appendix 3. We've got the headlines in the capital strategy paper, but it does identify to members at the table 6, at the bottom of page 33, that our projected debt will be around about £26.1 million by the end of the next financial year. And really, Chair, in terms of that particular paper, I'll probably leave some of that detail for questions by members, other than to say that from pages 36 to 37, the references to the annex there, that is an error. They are internal details, sort of documents that break down the capital programme, but the summary is contained within the paper for members' consideration. Finally, Chair, Treasury Management and Investment Strategy just basically identifies where our surplus funds are invested, the strategic approach in relation to that, and just to give an assurance really around, again, the method that's employed, where the principal strategic objective is to protect the capital, whilst at the same time trying to maximise return on investment. So that just provides members with some details in relation to that and how all of that works. So that concludes my presentation at this stage, Chair, but happy to take any questions unless you wish to hand over to Lord Bark or the Chief Constable. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that in-depth introduction to the budget. Simon, do you have anything to add to your statement within?
Yeah, Chair, if I may, firstly, there's an opportunity here to make local people happy. As I say in what I write, I've never been to a meeting or I've never had a letter saying, "Dear Chief Constable, there's too many police in my area." It doesn't happen, and I'm sure that's probably the experience of elected members as well. Paul has highlighted, the complexity of some of this. The 89 uplift is welcome, but it does come with some small print, which we need to make sure we deliver against, and a multi-year settlement would help, because what we're talking about here is the budget that in 8 weeks' time will be the budget we're using. And so you'll be reassured, Chair, that there are some people watching on the link, because what you decide will decide whether we need some extra trainers and some extra classrooms. And it is that kind of prosaic, really. You can see at paragraph 75, I've had the opportunity to comment. I guess something I'd want to reassure you as the panel in your role as scrutinising the PCC is that I do believe the Policing Protocol Order of 2011, my favourite bit of legislation, has been adhered to, and I have been properly consulted as described in that piece of legislation. And then I have to consider how the money allows us to deliver an efficient and effective force and adhere to the strategic policing requirements set by the Home Secretary and have regard to the police and crime plan. So I believe those things are in there. You can see what I've written. I guess this is the 10th budget that I've had the pleasure of presenting to some of you or being involved in the presentation. It's been slightly perplexing because it's the first one where the money's actually increased across that decade, which I do think is worthy of thought. And as Paul has explained, population growth is a considerable challenge. What I've tried to do is capture the breadth of the mission that we're involved in, which does go from antisocial behaviour through to counter-terrorism, which does involve complex safeguarding and partnership work, investigation work, response work, neighbourhood work, stuff that I know the people in the room are very familiar with. We have some particular pushes at the moment. We do have the added value of the Violence Reduction Network and the extra funding that's come into the Police and Crime Commissioner's office. But that's because we've got a challenge. That is because we have issues that mean we are an area that has been highlighted around serious violence, and so we need to get into that. And I know the panel particularly has heard in the past around county lines, drug dealing. We've updated you on the past about Lionheart, and certainly Councillor Taylor, I know she's not here today, asked sets of questions around that in the past. I think I can look you in the eye on the issue that we use this money prudently. Mr. Dawkins is very modest. He's rather good at his job. He's also parsimonious to the point of being a pain, frankly. But in the nicest sense, we are really lean. And that's not me saying that. That's HMI saying that. So the HMI, I think, has said two significant things that the panel can look for reassurance towards. The first is we're good at what we do, which is really, really important and is probably the highest level of achievement that we've had, certainly under the modern HMI framework. But they also produce comparative data which says we're really lean. So the back office bits are done in a really lean way. You might argue, actually, in the past, perhaps with IT in particular, overly lean. The other challenge for us, and I know that panel members will relate to this because you would tell the same story for your counties and your city, our relative funding does not stand up well against others. So out of 43 forces, we're at the 12th lowest. Now, you know, the chairman's a Forest fan. You're used to being at the bottom end of the table and making the best of it. I'm a Norwich fan. We're right at the bottom, you know, at the moment. But, you know, our relative funding is low. So that means we've got to be really efficient. But it does mean at a time of population growth that our ratios of officers and staff to the public are low. So just sort of 2 or 3 points that struck me as Paul was talking. Firstly, please don't lose sight of the fact that we are using reserves, and quite a lot of them, not far off £10 million to make this sustainable over the next 2 or 3 years. Secondly, we do expect some sort of national outcomes framework. So the trade for the extra COPs, the 20,000 or our share of the 20,000, there will be some sort of outcome framework. At the moment that's not defined, but one would imagine it will be about violence, murder, neighbourhood crimes, those kind of things. And the last point is on the 11th of March we moved to a new operating model. We've rejoiced in calling it a target operating model because we love jargon. But what that means is, because of decisions made in this panel in past years and the support of the Police and Crime Commissioner, we've been able to push out our resources into a more local model. And I'm sure, you know, you all are involved in different sorts of service provision across your councils. If you've got fewer people, sometimes you have to kind of brigade them in tighter and do some more systematic things. Because we've got some more, we can push some people out. So on the 11th of March, we're going to be pushing some more people out to local police stations. So they'll be geographically more locally based. We'll be changing who's doing some of those investigations. So if a crime happens in somewhere like Melton, it will be being investigated by an officer in Melton. And if you had an alibi chair, that would be helpful. So the target operating model will roll out on the 11th of March. This budget potentially will make that stronger. And, you know, this isn't just a numbers game, it's what we do with those numbers. You know, and I get that, and my responsibility is to make those officers and staff as efficient and effective as they can be, make sure they're using their time constructively, using technology to free that up. But I strongly support this budget because it gives us the chance to grow back some capacity that we've lost. And were we to agree this budget, and were you to agree this budget, it pushes us back towards some of the numbers we had in the past. Of course, there's nobody definitively saying those numbers are right. But it is striking that 10 years ago, on the first budget I presented, where I think you were on the authority, we had 2,300 police officers and 100,000 fewer people to police. If we could get back to 2,104, if we could get to 200 PCSOs, I think local people will see that difference. It won't be tomorrow, because there's got to be a lead in time, but I'm strongly supportive of the budget, and I would want to offer reassurance to the panel that we do understand this is a big call. We do understand we got money last year as well. We do understand the strategic push to make more of the funding local, which you could argue gives you more of a say in what we do. But we're very grateful for the support of the Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm supportive of the budget, and I believe that it reflects what I hear from local people.
Thank you very much, Simon. Lord Bark, is it okay if we move on to questions now? Or
yes, certainly. Thank you, Chairman. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Before I go any further, I'm going to say, Ivan, have you got any questions to ask? No. Ivan's got another meeting at 11 o'clock, so that's where it goes. I'm sure you all noticed Michael got up and left half an hour ago, I suppose. Sadly, although it wasn't unexpected, there's been a death in the family, and it was confirmed, and he's now driving down to Hampshire. So that explains Michael's absence. If anybody wants to volunteer to come here to help find the next questioner for me, I'd be most grateful. Don't all rush at once. Okay, if I miss you, it's your fault. So now, point out there is a recommendation at 3, A, B, C, D, E. Merenisa and Keith have written in. Merenisa had 2 questions, but she is in support of the budget. And Keith basically backed up Merenisa in her points and also supports the budget too. Merenisa did ask 2 questions. You've already answered one, which is the real risk of having to divert resources to the city does leave gaps in other areas seen as low crime areas, and how does the PCC assures itself on police and equity and measurement of the performance by area? I think basically you've answered that by pushing more officers out into the rural areas.
Yeah, and I guess broadly speaking, the split between what happens where is quite close to 50-50 actually, in terms of the city and the counties in total numbers. I think about 15% of our crime we would tag as a rural crime specifically as well. You know, I think where the challenge is about severity sometimes, so I recognise that. But I think I have already answered it in a way, Chair, because I mean, some of the response teams who are currently starting their days on the edges of the city will be starting their days in Melton, Loughborough, Harborough, in more numbers. So, you know, we're really seized that we need to go to where risk is, which is our challenge. But you know, the model is intended to give more localism. So that we've got local people who know who the local offenders are, for a start, and can work in more volume and capacity with local communities.
On her other question, I'll try and build that into as we go through the paragraphs. I've just got one general question, and then we'll get right into the paper. I've gone right through the paper and find absolutely no mention of the minimum wage, the national living wage. Has that been taken into account over the next few years?
Yes, it has, Chair. And we don't employ anyone directly in force that are subject to that. In other words, they're paid over and above the minimum wage, living wage rates.
Okay, members, as I said, there are recommendations, but we'll come right back to that at the finish. Les, is it just general, or can it be built into the procedure? I'm going to go through each section as it comes.
It's a holistic question, if I may, Chair, and it's definitely one, I think, for Simon, and that is, as a member of the public, what would the Chief say would be the kind of his top 3 areas of impact from the extra resource that we're going to get? Is that a sensible question, Chief?
I could do 2 really easily. The third one I might want to reflect on. I think the first one is, as a member of the public, I think our response capacity will increase. I mean, ballpark, we always talk about officer numbers and staff numbers, and police officer numbers have become the kind of way that policing is discussed. In simple terms, we've had the difference between our peak and our lowest number was about 900,000 fewer operational hours to deploy each year. So the first thing is we'll have some more people able to respond. I think the second thing is we'll have more people locally based. I think that will make us more effective at dealing with kind of local crime trends quicker, because I think we'll have better knowledge. And I think the third thing, in all of this, I've done what I've just sort of would generally moan at Lord Barker about doing, which is talking only about police numbers. which we do discuss on occasion. Actually, I think the PCSOs are really important in this. They are the visible presence, they are the problem solvers, they're the people often going into schools, doing that really important relationship building, the really long-term stuff. And so I think if we can just push those numbers back up, because they don't get abstracted away when a big thing happens somewhere, or the American president visits, or Leicester City play a football match. They're still there, they're still local. So I think 24/7 response capacity will increase. I think local investigations will be more local and more effective, and I think the presence of some extra PCSOs will just give us a presence and some problem solving. And I think those are things the public will notice. Of course, one of the challenges is that some of the trickiest things, the cyber world, the frauds, you can't deal with them always in a way that's hugely visible, and they still need dealing with. But I think the public will start to see, because 2,100 is a big difference from where we were a few years ago at 1,700.
Has indicated he wanted to come back in, but I think he's satisfied now. Okay, members, we will take the main report section by section. When it comes to appendices, we will take the appendices as a whole. So we're moving on to page 8, the executive summary. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I did send a list of questions through to you. I'm sure you've got those, and some of those have been answered through the report, and I'm grateful for you pointing them out. However, I think it's the point of view I've got here is on page 8, and it's page 8, paragraph 5, in actual fact, which I find it difficult to understand that it's linked to the 20,000 officers that's going to be replaced, the ones that was cut in the first place. And I've asked if that could be amended to not to link what we're doing today to that, simply because if you think about last year's budget, the £12 increase that produced 107, 24, but the other 12 was for the pension thing, to sort the pension thing out. That was in the previous report which I read last night. But even so, that's the 107 plus, and then this time it's £10, which will give us 100. Now that is linked. That's obviously 207, but it's not linked to the 20,000. What I would like to see is that election pledges have been delivered because we've now given you another 300 police, and that's not the case. It would be better to clarify that to the public, that they are paying the biggest bulk of the increase of the police officers through this period. That's an important point, because I think it's important that people realise that they are paying for it. National government are paying a small proportion of it to contribute towards that, but the biggest proportion is through the local taxpayer. Okay.
I'll do my best and pass on if I fail. Page 4, if you look at page 17, please, and paragraph 47, there is a link between the grant, the increased core grant, and the 20,000 national police officers, in the sense that the government are paying us with their increased core grant the infrastructure costs, not for year 1, but for years 2 and 3. So quite a lot of that money is taken up by the infrastructure costs of police officers that will come under the national scheme in the next 3 years, years 2 and 3. So we are in effect paying for the 100 new police officers out of the precept increase that I'm proposing. But there is a link between the 20,000, the national increase, as I say, and the increase in core grant that we get. I don't know if, Paul, you want to, if I made it less clear.
No, I mean, just to add to that, I agree with the points that have been made. For absolute clarity, on page 13, paragraph 22 and the table there, you'll see within the table Home Office core grant funding and the formula funding grant, 5.2 million and 2.7 million. That 7.9 million pound increase is intended to fund what Lord Bark said a moment ago. That is the infrastructure costs of delivering the national uplift in police officer numbers, of which as Leicestershire we're aware for next financial year is 89, but we don't know what the numbers will be beyond that. We can take a view on that, but it'd be too early to call at this stage. So the funding, as I outlined in my introduction, is money that's provided to the Commissioner upfront in advance of when those costs are going to be incurred. But as Lord Bark said, it is to fund 3 years worth of cost, with the first year being 2021. The salary cost for the police officers is a separate thing entirely, and at paragraph 47 on page 17, I talk about in the paper there, the second paragraph from the bottom of that page, that those salary costs of the 89 will hopefully be funded by a separate 2.5 million grant from Home Office. Some details of that still to follow. But as I mentioned again in the introduction, we have to physically recruit those officers first, demonstrate that we've done that, for that funding to then be awarded to the Commissioner. So hopefully that makes a link for you around core grant funding and that element of the increase in officer numbers. The final paragraph on page 17, still within paragraph 47, talks about the further 100 officers that Lord Bark is proposing for next year, and that is very much linked to the £10 increase in precept. Without that £10 increase, then we wouldn't have the funds available to recruit those officers. So that's over and above the 89. Hopefully that helps.
So can I come back? Thank you. So I'm grateful for the information. I just think it's important that we get the difference between what's being core funded and what's being paid for locally, because that's what people want to know. I'm sure your residents will want to know that, so that it's very clear, and thank you for that information. Can I just, supplementary to it, because we're replacing some of the police officers and staff, etc., we've not mentioned in this paper about police officers retiring, leaving, or whatever. And of course, once you get a percentage of those leaving the force during this period, you're always going to have a catch-up. Have you taken account of that? Thank you.
Yes. I mean, Kevin makes a really interesting point. Stat of the day, 42% of the police officers in Leicestershire Police, if they retired when we think they are most likely to retire, when their pension yields, can retire by 2023. That's quite a lot. And it presents with it some challenges, but they're in the kind of good challenges basket, which is, you know, we've got to deal with that. So, yes, that the expectation that people will leave, you know, what this gives us is a total number of slots to fill that are funded. And if Bloggs retires and Smith starts next week, it does allow for that. But you will see, you know, there is for us a real challenge. Almost half of the constables in the force can retire in the next 4 years, 3 or 4 years. But the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, members, thank you very much. Still on page 8, the Leicestershire context. I will say the typos at paragraph 16 have been noted. Chart 2, I've just asked this for maybe information for another time through email. Leicestershire Police Funding Split 2011-20. Do you have any comparative detail, shall we say, with Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, our immediate neighbours?
We don't have that. But in general parlance, we know that some counties are very different from the others. For example, I mean, just an example, not picking on them, but Surrey, for example, gets a huge amount of its money from council tax and precept, because they have houses there that are much above, you know, Band D, go up to Band E, Band F, Band G, Band H, and so they get a lot of money out of that. And there are other areas, force areas. I think up in the northeast, particularly, I've heard complaints around Northumbria, for example, where, of course, the amount they get from the council tax precept is much, much less because their houses tend to be D or down to C, B, and A. But we can't give the figures, I don't think, for our neighbouring forces. Is that right?
Yes, just very briefly, Chair, there's a national survey that's gone out, which we've been invited to complete. Most of the police and crime panel meetings are actually this week. So next week, all that data will be collated at the centre, and then we can share that with the panel in due course. Okay.
And I'll just make a point which the paper doesn't go into. One of the challenges for policing, big picture, I mean, yes, we've got that data. When budget cuts were imposed, they were imposed as a consistent percentage of the grant. And you can see in 2010, for us, that was 5% cut off 70%, whereas for Surrey, who again we're not picking on but we're using as an example, it was 5% of 50%. So we have a rather splendid chart that we've used to brief the potential PCCs, which demonstrates the impact of cuts vary. And of course the other place it then varies is the allocation of the uplift. So the uplift of 20,000, and we've only had the first 6,000 apportioned so far, is done on the basis of a grant share. And there are debates about whether that is fair or not. In general terms, the East Midlands forces would say there are other ways of doing that we would regard as more fair. Now, Mr. Heinsohn and I did touch on this in the week as to whether we should introduce this, but we decided this was a complex, long, I wouldn't say tedious, but a complex and long paper anyway, but there's a whole set of stuff there about funding. It is likely that within the integrated spending review, which I believe is what we're supposed to call the comprehensive spending review now, it's now an integrated spending review, there may be a look at the funding formula for policing. Of course, that's great, and 43 forces immediately get very excited, and 43 PCCs and 43 police and crime panels. But of course, unless the pot gets bigger, someone's got to lose. So we can produce those comparisons. You will find in general terms we're probably about in the top third of the highest percentage of grant, somewhere like that, aren't we? But we can share that data when we know it, because it will depend on decisions taken this week.
Thanks very much, Simon. Moving over, I think next section is page 13, the grant settlement. Page 14, tax base and collection fund details. Michael's gone now, just noticed. Yeah. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, page 14, item 31. It's just a simple question, really. And it's important about what the answer is going to be. Why £10? It's quite clear. Because it does say of the Home Office it's up to £10. So therefore the option could be less. The impact assessment on, if we reduce it by, say, £5, what would the impact be?
I think the impact would be less police officers recruited, less PCSOs recruited. The reason I'm making this proposal is because I think what matters to people, the public in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, is the number of police officers and PCSOs there are. Because I think we felt the lack of them, I have to say, over a number of years. It's not the explanation for everything that's gone wrong or right, but it is a factor. And as I think the Chief Constable said when he started, he's never been at any meeting ever or met anybody who said they want less police officers. So the simple answer is it would have meant cutting back the number of new police officers. That 100 would not be 100 anymore. It would be a much, much less figure, which is why I'm asking the panel to support this proposal.
So, sorry, Chairman, I'll just quickly chip in. In as neutral a way as I can, and as the operational bit of this, the whole thrust of what was announced by the government, and at the top of page 24 I actually quoted a bit of it, the whole thrust and the total package described was all based on everyone going for £10. So it uses the rather glorious phrase of assuming full take-up of council tax precept flexibility. Now, I'm sure a civil servant somewhere wrote that, and I'm probably a civil servant technically as well, but the gist of it is the assumption of the budget build is £10. And just two, because it's a really fair question you asked, that Lord Back's right, the answer basically is if you made it £5, it will be fewer people. I think the other thing is something that Paul's touched on the way through, which is in looking ahead, we sense that £10 might be a figure we look back on, and this time next year we're here sat with a share of an uplift that we don't know what it'll be, but with £10 being distant hills that we can only just barely remember, and that it's much reduced. So the assumptions later in the paper are that will be much reduced. So part of the decision for the panel, put sort of brutally, is you've got a chance now. We don't know whether that chance will be there next year, and this is one of the challenges of not having a multi-year settlement. So if the assumptions for next year, we don't think you'll be able to go as high, but I say that fully cognizant that, and Lord Buck has made the point as well, the panel has been ever so supportive of us over the last 2 or 3 years particularly.
Okay, I have Alan and then Les.
Thank you, Chairman. If I happen to still be here and if we take a formal vote, I will support the motion. However, would it surprise Lord Back that I've had many comments on social media and every single one says enough is enough, we don't want to pay it, we don't see any difference on the streets in Rutland?
It wouldn't surprise me at all, and there are many people out there who would say that and have said that. And I, if I had my choice, wouldn't be asking the local ratepayer, as it were, to fork out as high a proportion as we are asking them to do. I would think it was more an issue for central government to actually provide that money. I've said that in years past, but I'm faced with the position as we are, as it is. And if we want more police officers, which for me seems to be a priority for a large number of people, for a whole range of good reasons, then that's the choice I make between that and a lower precept. I know people in Leicestershire, some of them, and in Rutland too, can't find this money easily. I appreciate that, absolutely. But I do think it's a main feature in a lot of people's way of looking at the world is that they want to be secure, they want to see crime come down, and one of the ways, the best way of doing that is to have more police officers and more PCSOs. So I absolutely understand why people are saying this, and I don't expect it to be popular, but I think it's the right thing to do.
Les?
Thank you, Chair. Funnily enough, Lord Barks just echoed my exact phrase. Yeah, I don't think any of us particularly would want to increase the tax burden on any member of society, but that's where revenue comes from. And it, you know, yes, we could clearly decline the request, I believe, but actually in the landscape that we're in, with the economy we're in, with the changing nature of crime, which the Chief is the expert on, and the varying demands, the question is this the right thing to do? And for me, I'm actually quite happy to support the proposal.
Thank you very much. Moving on, still on page 14, council tax referendum limit. Paragraph 32, risks. Page 15, base budget preparation, approach to scrutiny. Paragraph 33. Oh, Kevin, sorry.
Oh, yeah, it's all right, thank you. It is page 15, first paragraph. Excuse me. The first bullet point, sorry, yes. Being the financial risk, how significant is the risk? And as it is earmarked finance sufficient to mitigate the high risk? Did that make sense then?
Is this the emergency services network?
Yeah.
There isn't much keeps me awake at night, but this is one of the things that keeps me awake at night.
Oh, is it?
So these are risks at that value, because this is the most delayed programme in policing nationally. And basically what it means is replacing the radio devices that you will see colleagues using in cars and on foot and on bicycles and covert, and it is a massive programme. It's a national programme. It's running late. We should have gone live in 2016. You'll notice that it's 2020. And so those risks are based on, it isn't going to happen this year, and they cover the costs that we think we will incur this year. It is a programme that worries me, it worries chiefs generally, it worries police and crime commissioners. There is vigorous national discussion about it because the systems we currently have stop working on a date ahead unless there's funding put behind them. And then there's a point that we're paying for a programme which hasn't quite delivered and a radio system that should have become obsolete. So this is the Conservative version of it, small c, not in the political sense, and it is a really risky, ugly programme that is being run nationally. Does that cheer you up? So if you could all save tin cans and bits of string. I mean, this has been subject to a pretty damning, the Finance Committee, Parliament, what's the proper name of that? No, not the Home Affairs, the Public Accounts. Public Accounts. If you want to read something sobering, the Public Accounts Committee. So I think going forward, and let's be blunt, there is an issue about who pays for the overrun. Certainly, as a chief, my view would be that should sit with the Home Office, who are responsible for the programme. I think probably that would be a view shared by most PCCs as well. It possibly isn't a view shared by the Home Office. It's one of the reasons I've got grey hair, Chair.
Okay, Kevin. Yeah. Paragraph 47. It outlines a significant increase in police officers, which I have to say is good news. But there has been slippage in the recruiting of additional officers. So how many of these additional officers will it be possible to recruit in 2021?
Yes, I mean, just pointing around to the slippage, Chair. I mean, the budget proposals for last year, for 2019-20, the 107, it was always proposed that we'd only be able to bring in 80 this financial year and 27 at the start of next financial year.
That was always made clear, I think.
So there's no slippage in relation to that. That was made clear at the outset. We do expect to deliver the 89, and we do expect to deliver by March 2021 the additional 100 linked to the precept increase.
Sorry, Chair, if it helps, certainly I had the pleasure last week of going to the National Policing Board, chaired by the Home Secretary. The discussion there around the 20,000 and taking Kevin's point that there's more than that was the 6,000, which is the first chunk, and the 8,000, the last 6,000, but were being referred to as the hard 6,000. Because the challenge we've got, and it's a good challenge and it's a problem I'd rather have, is getting enough people who meet the standard, reflect the diversity of the places we police and getting them in. So as we are, for current numbers, we know we've got enough people. We've got a kind of stacking system of people who have passed and have got dates in the months ahead. You know, were you to allow us to recruit the extra 100, we do need to find them. Recruiting is currently open. We're looking for people who are interested in the apprenticeship scheme, which is will be its third iteration of that. We've got the ability to translate degree holders on the degree holder entry programme, and we've still got some of what the old-fashioned entry that what people like me did 30 years ago who are coming through as well. So there is a real recruiting challenge, and one of the particular challenges, and I allude to it in my piece, is also making sure that we reflect the diversity in every sense of the places we police too. So it is a challenge. There's not been any slippage. We're bang on course. My lovely people in HR would say we've got this, we're absolutely lined up into the early part of next year to deliver what we've currently got. Obviously, you may be about to grant us some additionality, in which case, the other thing, just finally, the national uplift data is going to be published quarterly nationally so that everyone can see how forces are doing against the uplift. And as Paul has pointed out, you need to hit those numbers to get the money. It's all good fun here.
Well, you made Kevin smile anyway. Moving on to page 18. Oh, sorry, my fault.
Sorry, on page 17, yes. There's a row entry called investment, 5.7 million something. My question is, this is of course part of some treasury management. Is this or some of these monies invested in some unsecured deposits or bonds? And if they are, then what are the measures taken to mitigate the risks of loss of credits and things like that?
Okay, thanks, Chair. No, the title is probably slightly misleading. That line, that £5.8 million, is actually in relation to the cost of the 89 additional officers, the 100 additional officers over and above that, plus the 20 PCSOs, and their related infrastructure costs. So it's not to do with the Treasury side at all.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to ask a question with regards to the recruitment on police officers. Obviously, with the cuts, we would have lost police officers that were of some experience, and now we're facing a situation where we will have new police officers come on and they won't have had experience, they'll be brand new. So there will be challenges in terms of the timeline, getting them ready to be, you know, on the force, the training sort of period. And then with the stat of the day, with the proposed number of people that are going to retire, I can't remember the exact percentage. Yeah. How are we how are we mitigating those types of risks? Because essentially we will have a police force that will be less experienced than they were overall 10 years ago.
That's certainly one for the Chief, I think.
It all cascades downhill, doesn't it? I mean, look, it's an absolutely on-the-money question. We've been doing lots of work about making sure we've got enough tutors, because when you go through your sort of training school phase, you then have to be tutored. And we've had to work quite hard on that, because to be a tutor, you need to have a reasonable amount of operational experience. There's a big piece of work going on nationally about retention as well, because at the moment, as things are, if you get to, and police officers predominantly are on, there's a 30-year scheme for old devils like me, and there's a 35-year scheme for younger, fresher-faced people. Put brutally, as things currently are, the way that tax works, there is not really a financial logic to staying. So there is a piece of work being done nationally to look at how that could be changed or not, because to go to your point, I regularly see people who are in their late 40s, early 50s, who are saying, well, I don't really want to go, but if I stay, this happens to my family's funding and finances. So there's a piece of work about retention which might really help balance it off. But basically, we've done a massive piece of work projecting this. And there's a yin and yang in it, isn't there? we're going to have lots of young, keen but not experienced people. We need to maximise their access to experience. Some of the brigading locally will help with that because they won't be at distant outstations or in some faceless central point. They'll be part of a team. And so we've also incentivised a little bit our tutors, because tutoring somebody is quite a responsibility, and basically every one of these new people will need a tutor. So there's a big piece of work that we've really thought through to deal with the fact that 42% of currently serving cops can retire, which just reflects what recruiting patterns were 30 years ago. I mean, it's that sort of simple. So we can project that ahead. We put lots of effort into it. We're doing lots of work with our supervisors, so our sergeant ranks typically, who will have kind of pastoral care of these people first up. And we've upped the training for them to make sure that they can optimise it. And the only thing I would say, I was with a group of sergeants the other day with Rob Nixon, the deputy, and they in a less elegant way than you kind of asked the same question. A good problem to have is lots of really new keen people. Yeah. Good keen people can take you a long way. We just need to help them there. But it is a particular challenge. I mean, the only thing I would offer you some reassurance is the fact that we've spotted it and we're doing something about it. We're not saying, goodness, what do we do? And so we will be young and keen, and that thing about police officers looking younger every day we'll all feel. But there's a big piece of work to try and maximise experience and training. We deliver that training in conjunction with DMU for a lot of our new people, and we're really trying to maximise so that people come out of that training really ready, match fit for what they face. It's not going to be really theoretical stuff. So, I mean, I realise the panel likes to keep its distance. If any members of the panel, I'm sure the PCC would be happy to come and sort of look at what we're doing around that and come and see. I mean, to be honest, it's in the last few weeks I've had to welcome new recruits. I come away very jealous that they're starting. I come away thinking, blimey, they're good. They're a really switched on bunch of people joining us at the moment, and they've got lots of potential, so we need to support them in that.
Thank you for the invitation. Obviously, we'll look at that, Simon. The next question, I don't know whether it should really wait for Appendix 1 or this area, actually, but I'm going to go for it now. It's out the way with then. But there is an assumption that officers' pay increases by 2.5%. Yep. But if you go to Appendix 1, the very top line doesn't demonstrate that. Can you explain?
Yes, I can, Chair. I mean, effectively, if you were a 7-8 year PC, then your salary is a fraction over £40,000. If you're a new entrant, then your salary is £24,000. So £16,000 plus on costs. There's over a £20,000 reduction in the ongoing costs of new joiners. So based on what the Chief said around that 42% churn, what we'll see through time is a number of experienced, higher paid PCs leaving and lower paid new PCs joining. So even taking that pay inflation into account, you do see an overall comparative reduction in salary, which means it suppresses the increase in police pay from one year to the next. So all of those projections around starters and leavers have been taken into account, and they're costed on a person-by-person basis.
Very much. Moving on, still on page 18, something that your predecessor was always very keen to focus on. Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Any questions? Alan? Rutland again.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. We've already heard that the police force is considered to be run on a lean basis. What reassurance can we have that the OPCC is run on a lean basis? Do we really need those staff? What evidence do we have to assure us of that? There seems to be an increasing number of boards which need administration. Could I have some reassurance from the Commissioner?
You certainly can have reassurance, yes, absolutely. The OPCC isn't going to stay exactly the same, and we have consciously made an effort to expand its range of activities, as paragraph 51 51 says, but we're also always conscious that we don't want to increase the proportion of the OPCC costs as opposed to the police service in proportion, and I think we've managed to achieve that. But I'm going to ask Chief Exec of the OPCC to comment.
I think it's a good question, and there is no comparative data. So I can't find anything nationally that says this is what they all cost. I think the assurance lies partly in, if you look at the police and crime plan, it says 96% of the, so when this arrangement began, the 96% of the funding was passed on to the Chief Constable to spend. If you look at the budget report today, it's 98%. So the costs are low. The range of activities of the office have expanded, as detailed in the report, and the cost has gone up by £20,000. Staffing cost has gone up by £20,000. That is actually a reduction, because obviously that £20,000 includes the 2.5% pay award that Paul's already referred to, and the transfer of a person from the police to the OPCC to conduct specific work on complaints. So that's a post that's actually moved over from one side to the other. So I think from that point of view that there's assurance. We do scrutinise it, so there hasn't been any increase in staffing costs this year, nor in commissioning costs. Whilst there is a big increase in police, we took the view that we should pass the money entirely on to the police.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Page 19, commissioning. Page 20, medium-term financial plan. Page 21. Sorry, Kevin.
Sorry. The medium-term... The medium-term financial plan, an overall question with regards to the definition of that takes into account of year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, or the life expectancy of something that you're trying to achieve. I just need clarification on moving forward with regards to employing more staff within the police force and so on. We've got this precept this year, but it's only for 1 year. But we've is it called flatlining it year after that, year after that, year after that? So if you're flatlining and no increase with regards to, you don't know what the budget's going to be for next year, the danger for that, or the risk as I see it, is that more and more is going to be passed on to the local taxpayer. So a medium-term financial plan means you've got something in place already. In this case, you haven't, because you don't know what it is. Can it be called a medium-term financial plan?
It's absolutely necessary for planning purposes for an organisation like the police, for us to have a medium-term financial plan, so that you can base, as it were, future policy and the way you work on what you anticipate, often very cautiously, are going to be your likely funding, your likely income in years to come. And here, as Paul himself, I think, admitted, this is a cautious plan. This is a cautious, and it's right that it should be cautious. So it's almost not quite a worse scenario, but it's not a good scenario, which says that precept is limited to 1.99% each year, and that there's no core fund grant increase of any kind. But it's a practical and sensible way of doing it. Paul, this is a system that's been used, I think, for some time, and often proved accurate. The worst thing would be if it proved to be not cautious enough. And that's something I've learned over 3.5 years, I think, in this job. If it was not cautious enough, then you would have a very nasty shock when things went wrong. But here, the idea is caution, to make sure that we don't presume too much by the excitement of this year for what may be a good deal more ordinary next year.
The medium-term financial plan is primarily based on assumptions rather than facts.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
it has to be where you just get a yearly settlement. And that's why we'd all argue, I think, and I think this is true about all those in local government, that a 3-year settlement, at least a 3-year settlement, would be much preferable and make it much easier to plan properly than the present system.
Any more on use of reserves and balances? If not, we'll move on to page 23, preset proposal. I have Berenice's second question here. When I can find it. Here it is. The consultation response is similar to Brexit. Take no notice of that. That's what she said. But it's done with, remember. If you put the undecided and those not in favour of an increase, it's pretty close. Going forward, is it possible for the PCC to provide an insight into the geography and age breakdown of the respondents?
About general reserves again, it's just point of clarification really is that use of any reserves can only use them once anyway. I understand from the paper, and please clarify for me if I'm wrong, is that some of those reserves are being used to prop up what we're trying to achieve now. And the more you do that, you can only, you're going to reduce those reserves to a point where you're going to have to stop. I know there's a minimum reserve status here that says you can't go below that, but at what point will you probably end up going below it, or do you anticipate putting back into reserves as time goes on?
Yes, I mean, in terms of the strategy around use of reserves for next year, in the paper it does identify that there'll be a £1.8 million surplus next year going into reserves if the £10 preset proposals are supported today. And then the plan in then years 2 and 3 is to use up to £9.6 million worth of reserves to support the medium-term financial plan. But that depends on what the settlement looks like, what the preset referendum threshold is, and any other changes that may come through around risk, etc. So we're trying to prudently plan for 3 years to avoid boom and bust, to ensure that we can sustain the growth in police officer numbers and PCSOs for a minimum of a 3-year period. But that's on the basis of only receiving confirmation around funding for next year.
I just, there was, government have been saying for a number of years now that they want police forces, OPCCs, to actually spend some of their reserves. They don't want the reserve level as high as it was. And we have actually been very good at that. We've not overspent our reserves, but we have followed the advice from government and reduced our reserves where appropriate.
And thank you for your time. I think it's important that for clarification, obviously for residents, is that you're using the reserves because there may be the shortfall in the revenue support grant in future years, so you're going to be using those to keep it going, to enable that the police staff that you're trying to achieve is actually achieved, but by using the reserve to do it. Is that right?
Thank you, Kevin. Page 23, statement of the Chief Constable. Page 25, robustness of the budget statement of the Commissioner Chief Finance Officer. which brings us to the end of the paper, but we do move on to the appendices, and I told you, or indicated right at the start, I will take the whole section. Appendix 1, which is just one page. Appendix 2, which is more detailed. Any questions on that? Okay, I've got one here, which is the on Appendix 2. For the 2021 10.2 CAP programme, in line with the last 2 years, reducing to 6.7 million and then 3.5 million in the following 2 years, Table 1. How realistic is this compared with the past spend need? And would there be any fear of reductions in, say, ICT estates?
Yes, I think, Chair, what we've tried to do is to look to the future to see what schemes are likely to come through. But certainly in the world of IT, that's a constantly changing picture. Also this year, the capital grant awarded to the Commissioner has reduced from £700,000 to £200,000, so a £500,000 reduction in grant. And that potentially can limit our flexibility from 21-22 onwards. So we've included those things that we know about, but as we move through time, I'm sure other things will come to our attention that we'll need to potentially plan for.
Members, anything else on Appendix 2? Which takes us, when I find it myself, to Appendix 3 on page 39. Just like to make a very small, very pedantic and annoying remark, which is you suggest in 4.4 that the Bank of England has now raised its rates to base rate to 0.75%. My research shows it was actually raised in August 2018, so it seems a bit out of date in a way, that comment. Just a small, very pedantic remark, that's all. Yeah. Okay, any other questions in general? Looking around, I'm going to have a very bad neck by the time this is over today. I think we're scanning around everywhere. Yep, Hammer.
Coming back to the same question that I asked, the page 44, it shows some summary of investments. Are there any of those in unsecured deposits, and what are there any risks associated with them? And if there are, what are the actions taken to mitigate those risks?
Okay, thank you. No, there are no risks associated with it. We look very closely with external support around this at where funds can be invested, the extent to which they can be invested, the risks associated with those. And as I mentioned during my introduction earlier, the key approach that we take is to ensure that the principal, the amount that we invest, is actually protected and that's not at risk. And beyond that, then we try and maximise those investment returns, but we do take a very prudent approach. And it is about trying to get the balance right between risk and reward. But with the advice that we receive and the approach that we take, we're satisfied that we mitigate all the known risks as far as we sensibly can.
We now move back really to page 7. There is a recommendation, but basically what this budget is about really is people, isn't it, really? I mean, that sums it up. I know it's a very short statement, but even so, getting back, just looking at the figures here, 2,104 by 2021, and PCO establishment also to increase. There is a recommendation at 3, it goes in A, B, C, D, E. I will read them all out because it's such an important meeting. So the Police and Crime Panel is asked to A, note the information presented in this report, including the total 2021 net budget requirements of 199.863 million, a council tax preset requirement 2020-21 of 76.829 million, B. Support the proposals to increase the 2020-21 precept by £10 per annum for police purposes to 233.2302 for a Band 2 B and D property. C. Note the future risks, challenges, uncertainties and opportunities included in the precept proposal, together with the financial and operational considerations identified. D. Note the Home Office grant allocations notified through the final settlement and the Band D council tax base and surplus received from the collecting authorities. And E. Note the current medium-term financial plan contained in Appendix 1. I will move those recommendations. I look to Les to second. Les seconds. Sorry, Jonathan. Jonathan also seconds. You're so tucked away there. I will ask you all to raise your hands rather than just nod it through. It is, like I said, the most important meeting of the year to me, at least, and I'm sure it is to everyone else. Kevin, you want all in favour of the proposal, raise their hands. Okay, thank you. I don't... Oh, sorry. I think it's unanimous. Yeah. Alan, did you... Yeah, sorry, Mr. Dan. So it is unanimous then. Thank you very much, members. The time is 10 to 12. I'm going to suggest, because someone didn't bring me a coffee back, we have a 10-minute pit break, but we will start precisely at 12 o'clock by the iPhone. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to the panel.
We will write a letter of support. Well, Ewan will write a letter of support signed by me. Yeah. Thank you.